At the start of the movie, Claire is washing dishes when she hears peculiar voices emanating from the plug hole in her kitchen sink. Later, when her husband Juan arrives home, she informs him that she couldn't prepare dinner because she heard voices in the kitchen. Juan investigates the sink, and Claire explains that she heard them talking. Juan suggests that the plumbing might be old, causing the pipes to make noise, but he inquires about what she heard. Clara reveals that they were human voices, and they ominously declared their intent to kill her. That night, Clara goes to the washroom, and after a while, Juan is awakened by thumping sounds. Assuming that his neighbor Walter is doing repair work, Juan, in frustration, tells him to stop the noise. However, when the sounds persist, he goes outside and angrily tells Walter to stop banging on the wall. Now, as he returns home, the sounds persist, and he realizes that the noises originate from the bathroom. Anxiously, he goes to the washroom, only to discover Claire's lifeless body hovering in midair, repeatedly slamming with the wall as if thrown by an unseen force. Juan is terrified at the sight and attempts to intervene, but Clara continues colliding with the wall. The scene then transitions to a police station where 3 detectives are questioning Juan. Jonah says they know that he didn't kill his wife. They show Juan some pictures, and he denies that the person in the photos is Clara. Dr. Mora informs him that in 1998, in the United States, there was a case very similar to his. Rosenstock requests Juan to provide a detailed account of everything he can recall from the past 2 weeks in his neighborhood. Juan recounts an accident that occurred outside his house and mentions his annoying neighbor Walter, who engaged in home repairs at all hours. The scene shifts to Walter, who's on a call seeking Dr. Albrecht, only to be instructed to call again the next day. Later that night, as Walter attempts to sleep, his bed starts moving on its own. The lights flicker, and he suddenly wakes up, yet the bed continues to move. Walter, frightened, checks under his bed but finds nothing there. However, an entity is revealed to be lurking under his bed. The lights then go off, and as Walter tries to plug in the plug, the entity standing behind him runs away into another room. Walter gets terrified and begins reading prayers, but he hears footsteps approaching him. And then, a hand appears above him. The next day, Walter wakes up to the sounds in his house and is shocked to discover that all of his belongings are scattered. Later, he calls Dr. Albrecht's office again, explaining that he needs help as he hasn't slept in weeks, and his medicines are ineffective. He insists on telling the doctor that he saw something beyond mere noise, banging, or moving things. However, the person on the other end informs him that the doctor can't treat him now, and they can't accept his case. When Walter persists, she informs him that the doctor doesn't take on cases without personally analyzing the evidence, but she is unable to do it at the moment. Walter brings a video camera to record the evidence, and that night, he sets up the camera in his room above a wardrobe. After a while, as Walter falls asleep, he suddenly wakes up to a sound and discovers his camera on the floor. Terrified, he sees a shadow on the wall, and when he attempts to turn on the light, he realizes it's not working. He tries to plug in the plug, and as the light turns on, the shadow disappears. Walter checks the camera footage and observes a tall, naked figure standing over him as he sleeps, then hiding in the wardrobe. Frightened, he grabs his gun and approaches the wardrobe, but finds nothing when he opens it. He rewinds the footage and discovers that the entity emerges from under his bed. Simultaneously, the door of his wardrobe opens on its own, revealing the entity. Walter senses its presence and attempts to reach for his gun, but the scene cuts at this point. The next morning, a boy approaches Walter's house to retrieve his ball, but he hears noises from inside, and Walter warns him not to drink the water and orders him to leave. Frightened, the boy retreats and ends up being hit by a bus. We then witness Alicia grieving the death of her young son. Alicia's ex-boyfriend, Police Commissioner Fones, contacts Jano, a paranormal investigator and former coroner, and he informs Jano about the accident and requests his assistance. Meanwhile, Alicia hears thumping sounds in her house. When she investigates, she sees footsteps approaching her house and a shadow at her door. Later, when Jano arrives at Alicia's house, Funes explains to him that when his officers arrived, they found the door opened and Alicia in a distressed state. Funes adds that the child died 4 days ago, and he personally attended the burial and went to the wake. Alicia claims that her son suddenly appeared and sat with them, and when Jano goes to another room, he discovers the child sitting on a table. Funes informs him that the officers declared seeing him move, and he himself thought he witnessed movement. Jano approaches for a closer inspection, attempting to determine if the boy is alive. Funes mentions the rotten smell and questions if Jano believes Alicia may have mounted all this. Jano points out that the boy's hands are destroyed, as if he has been scratching the soil for several days. He suggests that there are numerous cases of grave desecration carried out by relatives of the deceased. Jano proposes analyzing the mother's clothes, as they may find evidence of bacterial infection or cadaverous flora or fauna. Jano then turns off the lights and instructs Funes to provide the explanation he just gave him. He acknowledges that Funes is not satisfied with his response, and that's acceptable because it's not the true answer, but it's the one he should give. Just then, they hear a noise and discover that the glass of milk on the table has fallen, and Funes comments that he moved. Jano returns to check on the boy, and Funes asks him if his arm was on the table as it is now. Jano admits he's not sure and suggests the best course of action is to bury him again. Funes questions if Jano is drunk, to which Jano says if the prosecutor intervenes, Alicia will be locked up in a mental hospital and will spend several years there. The next morning, when Jonah comes out of the house, he notices Dr. Albrecht outside Walter's house. He approaches her, introduces himself, and mentions that he attended several of her lectures about paranormal events and metasymbiosis. He asks her what she is doing here, to which she says it's strange that she rings the intercom, and it seems that someone answers, but nobody speaks. She asks him if he knows Walter, to which Jonah says he doesn't live here either, and invites her to join him, assuring she will find it interesting. He introduces her to Funes, but Funes asks if he can speak with him for a moment. Funes explains that they won't be able to move the body due to the broad daylight, making it complicated. Meanwhile, Albrecht captures some photos of the handprints on the wall, and Jonah assures Funes that she knows what she is doing. Funes mentions that he is retiring in 2 months and doesn't have a single stain on his record. He expresses concern that he could get into trouble because of this situation. Jonah suggests that he go to the cemetery to address the burial issue, while assuring Funes that both he and Albrecht will take care of handling Alicia. Albrecht asks him, what are they two hiding? And shows him the hand and footprints on the walls. They proceed to enter the house, where Albrecht detects an unpleasant odor and remarks that it resembles the smell of something dead. Jonah guides her to another room to reveal the body of the child. They then come out, and Jonah reveals to her that he used to be a coroner, having worked for over 15 years alongside Funes. He recounts an incident when he had to examine the body of a young man with 14 bullets in his head. Jonah spent 5 hours scratching the guy's skull, and to his surprise, the man grabbed his hand and opened his eyes to gaze at him. Jonah thought it was all a result of his stress, but it wasn't. He experienced a similar occurrence with the body of an old man who had been dead for 2 days. The man woke up, looked at him, and even engaged in conversation. Meanwhile, a neighbor boy named Patricio jumps into Alicia's house, and he knocks on the door seeing the boy. To Patricio's horror, the child inside turns his head in the direction of the newcomer. On the other hand, Albrecht shows Jonah the pictures taken by Walter, and only then do they get interrupted by screams. They rush in to find that someone has entered, and they discover Patricio's bag there. They decide to move the boy's body into a freezer, unaware that Patricio is recording them. Jano remarks that no one will believe the kid when he tells this story, and then he places a flower pot on top of the freezer. Later, Funes returns and informs Jonah that he has resolved the cemetery issue. Jonah leads him to the freezer, and as Jano begins to unplug it, Funes hears the boy crying and then a thud on the freezer. They tell Funes that they will need to relocate the body, emphasizing that he must cooperate to prevent a recurrence. Back in the interrogation room, Jonah explains that they have the superintendent's permission. However, to proceed further, they require Juan to sign some authorizations. They will need his house to spend some nights there, but he has to authorize them. Albrecht explains that there have been some paranormal events occurring in a same radio, and one of the vectors is his house. Juan signs the papers and asks them what this means. They explain that this signifies their plan to divide and investigate each of the houses where they suspect paranormal events are occurring. Juan then inquires about his neighbor Walter, to which they respond that there is no news about him. Albrecht takes Juan's house and sets up her instruments, while Rosentalk and Funes investigate Walter's house. Funes calls Albrecht and informs her that there is no power, suggesting that he can ask someone to reconnect it. However, Albrecht says it's better to have the lights off to find what they are looking for. Funes then asks Rosentalk if he could specifically tell him what they might find here, to which Rosentalk responds that they may discover some clues about what happened that night. Funes mentions that he takes anticoagulants and is practically deaf, to which Rosentalk suggests that this is not the right place for him. In Alicia's house, Jonah receives a call from someone who asks if she can speak to Alicia. Jonah informs her that Alicia has been staying at her sister's house for a few weeks now. He provides her with Alicia's number, and when he asks who she is, the lady disconnects the call. He then plays the recorded calls and listens to his neighbor Sarita's call, who mentions that Patricio came home without his backpack, claiming he dropped it at her place. Meanwhile, Rosentalk discovers forks and knives stuck in a drawer and comments on how strange it is. At the same time, Jonah listens to Sarita telling Alicia to urgently call her back. She mentions that Patricio recorded something very strange with his cell phone, and the video is connected to her son, and they are very frightened after seeing it. Here, while Rosentalk is checking the cutleries, a knife pierces his hand. Funes tries to help him to get it out, but Rosentalk asks him to stop and tells him that it's sucking his blood. He says there is someone in the drawer, so Funes points his gun toward it, but when Rosentalk opens the drawer, the entity slides toward the other side. Rosentalk asks Funes not to stop, takes out that knife from his hand, and asks him to help him. Funes calls Albrecht and informs her that things are escalating. Rosentalk takes the phone from him and assures Albrecht that they are on the right track. Just then, Funes notices a watch falling and moving on its own. Rosentalk advises him that it will take some time for the painkiller to take effect, so in the meantime, he should clean up the blood that they left in the house. Now, as Funes is cleaning the blood, he notices strange, elongated footprints. Suddenly, the sink begins making a noise, startling Funes, who retreats in terror. Meanwhile, Jonah observes some paranormal activities in the house, and suddenly the phone rings. Funes informs him that he's opting out because he's petrified. Jonah inquires about Funes' location in the house, and Funes replies that he's in the kitchen. Jonah informs him that there is a man by the window, but when Funes goes there to check, he claims nobody is there. Jonah insists that it's strange he can see him, and not see him at the same time, and suddenly the entity appears in front of him, and the call disconnects. On the other hand, Albrecht discovers a crack in one of the walls. Funes informs Rosentalk that he's leaving, but Rosentalk tells him that he found something down there. He picks up the bedsheet and explains that it's empty now, yet not empty at the same time, emphasizing the concept of perspective and multiple points of view. Moving to the other side of the bed, he picks up the bedsheet again, and to Funes' horror, this time he sees the entity hiding under the bed. Rosentalk speaks of darkness and light, describing two different realities existing in the same space and time. Funes, terrified by the sight of multiple entities, attempts to shoot them, but the entities retreat, and Funes rushes out of the house. Rosentalk calls Albrecht and tells her that it's what he was looking for. Albrecht asks him now what should they do, to which he says they should try to register everything they can. Funes goes to Alicia's house and senses that something is amiss. He observes blood on a drawer and approaches it. However, upon opening the drawer, he finds it empty. Strangely, he still hears strange noises emanating from it, and to investigate further, he moves the drawer and hears thumping from within. Confused, he dismantles the back of the cupboard, and to his horror, he finds Juno inside with glass in his eyes. Meanwhile, inside that crack, Albrecht discovers Walter and introduces herself. Just then, Funes arrives and informs her that Jano is not well. Albrecht advises him to stay calm and cautions him not to trust everything he sees tonight. Funes explains that he found Juno inside a cupboard but couldn't get him out. Albrecht urges him to calm down, wash the blood from his hands, as these entities are attracted to blood. She then questions if he used running water tonight, to which he says he must get out of here. Albrecht calls Rosenstock and informs him that they have to abandon the investigation as they are too exposed. Funes questions if there must be an explanation for all of this, as he needs to clarify things to others. Albrecht proceeds to explain to him that they study dimensional planes that coexist in balance, organized like segments of an orange. Life exists in both planes, and water enables the transportation of microscopic life, which can gather, nest, or reproduce. These entities can utilize human bodies, and she has no knowledge about the nature of these beings or why they attack humans. Funes asks her is there a way to stop it, and as she says no, the entity seizes her head and kills her by breaking her neck. Funes, overcome with shock and horror, suffers a heart attack, and the entity emerges from the crack, revealing its presence. Meanwhile, Rosenstock observes a wardrobe behind him, opening on its own. In Walter's location, Funes regains consciousness after a while, and as he gets up, chairs in the house start moving on their own. Terrified, he backs away, only to notice the entity right above him, but it disappears the next moment. After a while, Alicia returns to her house and Funes asks her to help him and get him out of there. Alicia says he made her look like she was crazy and took away her baby, but they saw him. She also watched the videos and saw him hiding him and asks him why he put concrete over his grave. He explains that he did it for her and requests her to take him to the hospital. She agrees to this, but before he can get into the car, he notices Alicia's kid's body inside it, and she says she isn't going to leave him there. Funes retreats and gets into his car, and only then Albrecht arrives, saying he still has time, prompting him to drive away from there. Later, Officer Enrique contacts Funes and informs him that he is in the neighborhood and searching for him. Funes instructs him to leave the area immediately, but Enrique discloses that he is in front of Alicia's house, and his friend Jano is there. Funes strongly tells Enrique to get away from that place, and Enrique assures him that he is leaving. Funes returns to Alicia's house with 2 big cans of gasoline. He tells Alicia that they have to go, but finds that she has killed herself. He then begins pouring gasoline all around the house, and notices a handprint on the kid's room door. As he opens the door, he sees the child standing right in front. In shock, he quickly shuts the door and continues pouring gasoline before finally leaving the house. Now, as he attempts to light the matchstick, he finds Jano next to him, blowing it out. Funes startles, gets back, and decides to shoot at the gasoline to set the house on fire. After 1 year, at the psychiatric facility, the police attempt to further question Juan, but he is distracted by someone and asks them if he came with them. They turn around and find no one there. However, Juan tells them that he looks like Rosenstock, but his face is burned. Suddenly, a chair moves, and as Juan says he came with them, the chair flies toward the camera. Thanks for facing the frights with us. If you survived this video, drop a like, summon that subscribe button, and brace yourself for more horror. Until next time, stay spooked.